Hey everyone, this is Edward back again for part 4 in my 205 philosophical questions. It's another lovely day in Taiwan. The sun is finally out today, so pretty good day so far. The question I'm going to try and tackle is somewhat lighter this time compared to the previous ones we've done. The question is, where is the line between art and not art? So basically, what is art, or how do we define art? So we can probably say this one is similar to the other questions in that it appears perhaps deceptively simple until we start digging into it, and then it of course all falls apart and we become perhaps lost very quickly. So what is art? Well, I suppose one quick answer that people always give is, well, art is what is beautiful. Okay, that could be correct to a certain degree, but of course there are many things that are beautiful that are not art. I would probably say, like, we go outside, we see the mountains, we see the flowers, we see the trees, the birds singing, and that is probably not what we mean by art. It is beautiful, but is it art? I suppose if you believe in God and God created the world and all of that, you might say, well, God is the universal or consummate artist, and so everything beautiful he created is art. But I think for most of us, that is not going to be good enough. And of course, as I'll discuss a little bit later, perhaps art does not even need to be beautiful in any sense. I think a lot of us have probably seen works of art or movies or things that have not been beautiful or perhaps pleasant to look at or to watch, but probably still fit our definition of art somehow. So there must be something else going on here as well. Another thing that we often talk about for art is that it's communicating something, right? It has some message, perhaps a social message, or communicating something about religion or life. And this is what makes it art. This appears to be on the right track, right? But we run quickly into some other issues, like, is philosophy somehow art? It is communicating a message. It quite clearly is intended to teach us something about life or religion or something like that. So perhaps there has to be something else happening. We have to feel something from it. There's an emotional part. Perhaps philosophy is just too much about the logic of the idea. There's not emotion there, so we can separate them out. Perhaps art is something that we pay for, right? Certainly if you watch the art markets and things, it appears that people are willing to pay a huge amount for things that they have determined to be art, in the quotation marks there. So is art something that we pay for? If we don't pay for it, is it art? This, again, appears to be perhaps something helping us out, but then I think of public art, right? We see it all over the place. There are some famous artists, or even sculptures, like the name of it escapes me now, but the president's carved onto the side of the mountain in America. Is that art? I think possibly yes, right? It's free, it's for the public. Or what about street art, right? Someone just spray painted something on the ground, or something that will just disappear tomorrow. So it was never for sale. I think that probably fits many definitions of art. And perhaps the final nail in the coffin of this argument is, if I was to take something that perhaps we all have agreed was art, like the Mona Lisa or some famous painting like that, and I made it free somehow, right? Just anyone can come up and take it home, play with it, do whatever they want with it. Have I somehow made it not art because I changed its value from, billions of dollars to nothing? No. I think we can't say that, right? So I think the closest we're getting so far is art must have some emotional component to it. There's probably some sort of message underlying it. And possibly beauty is there to a certain degree, right? It doesn't need to be the perhaps classical idea of beauty, but there must perhaps be something catching to the eye, perhaps interesting to the eye. Those elements are probably part of all of this. Another part, actually, I didn't really quite cover there is what mediums are we talking about for art, right? Paintings, right? I have a painting behind me. Movies, books, music. These are probably all good categories for art. They're not all visual categories though, right? So that at least visual aesthetic, that visual beauty does not work for all of them, particularly music, right? We can't really see the music. So the emotional component perhaps is the one that carries across all of these, right? Whether I'm reading, listening, or just sort of staring at the painting, that emotional impact is still there. And I think that's probably something that is perhaps going to be common across all of these, along with perhaps that message. There's a message being conveyed, perhaps just an emotional message, or perhaps something more deep about society, or something like that. Okay, so we have the emotional message, we have possible interest to the eyes or the ears, I guess. And there is this idea, I suppose, when we talk of art, that it's all sort of good, but is it possible to have bad art? I guess so. So the quality of the art itself does not affect whether it is art, which is quite an interesting thing, right? That as long as you're meeting these sort of definitions of intending to convey a message, you've met the low bar of expectations of being an artist or creating art, but there is nothing about it being good or bad. So that's quite interesting to me, I think. We're not defining art as good in itself. We're simply saying that art is just certain categories of intentions, I suppose, right? The intention to create that message or things that I just mentioned. So another part of this that I was wondering about is, if I don't know the intention of the artist, right? I don't know what message he is conveying or trying to convey. Is the thing I'm looking at or listening to, is that not art until I know what he meant by his picture? Let's stick with art. Stick with paintings for just a second, because I think that's slightly easier to discuss. So if I'm looking at this painting and I have no idea what it is, it appears to be a bunch of squiggly lines or something, right? Maybe like, best example would be abstract art, right? Often when you look at it, you have no idea what's going on. And then you look closely at the little message beside the painting and it says, oh, this is a critique of industrial capitalism, right? And you say, oh, of course, industrial capitalism. I can see it now, squiggly lines. Makes sense. But if you didn't tell me that it was a critique of industrial capitalism, I would have assumed that the artist simply liked squiggly lines, perhaps. At this point, did I not realize it was art because I did not realize what the artist was intending to convey? Or is it possible for me to create my own message or my own idea about the thing I'm looking at and then decide, is it art? Right? As an extreme example of this, say the artist died before he ever got to tell us that it was a critique of industrial capitalism. So I found it, up in the attic in some abandoned house. And I pick it up and I say, oh, look at this very interesting arrangement of paint on canvas. It appears to be a large amount of squiggly lines. At that point, I could say, I think this message is telling me of the danger of squiggly lines and how lines should be straight. And I think, yes, straight lines tells you to lead a straight life. And a straight life leads you on the straight path to happiness, right? Okay, so I created a message from that thing I looked at. Have I now defined that thing, the painting with the paint on the canvas, have I defined that now as art because I have assigned a message to it? And perhaps as an additional complication, given that it is abstract art, I may look at it and say, well, it's not beautiful, right? It's not aesthetically pleasing. I don't want to put it above my dining room table and sort of stare at it. It perhaps is quite unpleasant to look at with all the squiggly lines everywhere. It's sort of disturbing. or perhaps even makes me feel a little bit dizzy if I look at it too long. Is this adding to or taking away from it, moving towards that minimum threshold of it's art, right? And I would say it's actually hard to tell, right? Art is one of those things where we seem to just defer to the so-called experts. I'm doing the quotations again there, right? That I am not an art expert, so when I look at my squiggly line painting, perhaps it doesn't matter what conclusion I come to, but if I go down to New York or somewhere and I give it to some well-renowned art expert, and he or she looks at my squiggly lined painting and says, ooh, you've got some very good squiggly lines here. And they tell me, this is very interesting. This is actually a discussion about the devil's relationship with man. They say, oh, I thought it was about the dangers of squiggly lines. They say, no, you're wrong. It is actually about the devil. I say, okay, so do we have art now? And it appears to be like magic, perhaps. If that expert says it's art, it's art. Whereas if I said it was art or not art, who cares? I have perhaps been totally useless or totally ignored, right, on my opinion here. There may be something to, if I could convince enough of my friends that my squiggly line painting was art, then it is art, right? But is it possible, if I was the only one who saw it, right, and I never painted it, could I still consider it art? And this is the odd part, right? I think, yes, I can say what is art, right, as an individual. We all have that ability. But when it goes up to the societal level, that is based on something different. Either the experts, whoever they are, have told us, the proletariat, the hoi polloi, the common people, they say, here is art for you. And we say, oh, thank you very much for that. Thank you for gracing us with your amazing knowledge of squiggly lines and telling us what their hidden meaning is. And we say, thank you. Thank you for allowing this art into our lives. Or alternatively, just enough of us common people get together and say, hey, this is art, and we like it, right? I don't know what I like, but I know what I like. Something stupid like that. Another Taiwan beer today. Nice wheat beer. Pretty good. Not art, probably. It's interesting, actually, we talk about food and perhaps alcohol as being an art, but it is not conveying a message, I think. I don't think there is any hidden meaning in my beer that I know of. I hope. So, art has many components, apparently now, right? Originally, we just thought, oh, it's sort of interesting to look at. It's conveying some sort of message. But if it's not a sort of a agreed upon message, or perhaps a message given to us by the experts, it has not met that definition of art yet. Another thing that sort of reminds me of this is there's a movie, kind of a small movie, so I don't know how many people really saw it, but it was called The Burnt Orange Heresy. And at the very beginning of the movie, there is an art expert giving a speech, and he's talking about his book that he's written about how he's critiqued all these different artworks and things. And he puts a piece of art up on the screen, and he says, okay, everyone, what do you think of this art? And people look at it and say, oh, it's okay, I guess. It's not hugely interesting. And he says, well, let me tell you about this. And he goes off in this whole story about how the colors of this sort of nothing painting are a story about the artist's wife, and that she died a very sad, horrible death, and like the orange and things are telling us about her life and how much he misses her. And he goes on and on like this for a bit, and then he stops and then he looks at the audience again and says, so, what do you guys think about this piece of art now? And they say, oh, it's very good. It's very, very good, very emotional, very touching. And he says, well, let me tell you this. I made all of that up. I painted this painting earlier today, right? Everything else was a lie. And so this does get to something quite sort of worrying about art, is perhaps it is all kind of a lie, right? I mean, it's all kind of meaningless. And maybe that whole thing about a message and things is kind of meaningless, and that the only perhaps real thing is, do we like looking at it, or do we like listening to it? And everything else is this kind of BS, right? We're just making it up. Maybe it makes us feel smarter. There certainly is art that you look at where you really do feel like it is almost like a joke. And I think sometimes they meant it as a joke. Like I think of Salvador Dali. Very famously, he did a phone that was a lobster. So he called it a lobster phone. And that appears to be a joke. I mean, he's a funny guy. I've seen him make jokes. But it's in the art museum. Or Marcel Duchamp, right? He just did a urinal, stuck it on the wall like you see in the bathroom. And so people say, well, I could have done that. Plastic lobster on a phone, urinal, right? Or, picture of Campbell's soup. Andy Warhol, who did that. People say, I could do that. Or looking at the abstract artists like Jackson Pollock, just a bunch of paint seemingly thrown at the canvas. People say, my kid could do that. So is that art then? Some people might say, well, even if you could have done that, theoretically, maybe you could have done that, but you didn't, right? They did it first. You didn't think of it. So that's why it's interesting, even though it might seem very commonplace or silly or something like that. So it's an interesting idea there. I do look at perhaps like Jackson Pollock, like I mentioned. His paintings are interesting, but I don't know if they're interesting because I really find them interesting, or because I know they're Jackson Pollock's paintings and I know I'm supposed to find them interesting. I don't feel any real emotion when I look at them, other than, ooh, Jackson Pollock, I know he's good. But I don't know if I could really say I know emotionally he's good, just that I read it in a book or I saw it on TV and they said, he is good. People pay a lot of money for him. Alternatively, though, there is an abstract artist that I do quite like called Mark Rothko. And he just does kind of very dark sort of lines, going up or down or something, thick, dark lines. And there is something powerful about what he does, right? I do feel there's something happening there. So it is possible to have these sort of perhaps very simple paintings that are conveying something strong, right? So I would feel that Rothko's painting is somehow more art than Jackson Pollock's, perhaps. But then we're back to that individual feeling about art. And as I said, there is some issue with that, right? In that if you don't agree with me, then I'm the wrong one, I guess, right? Because I haven't convinced enough people that whatever I'm looking at is art or it's good. Let me think, what else is happening? Let's turn to movies, because that's another area that's quite interesting. Are movies art? Well, there's certainly a lot happening in there. They are visually appealing for sure, right? And there is often a message there, but not always, perhaps. And I think a good example we could talk about here is the Avengers movies, because I think it was last year, sometime maybe early last year, the director Martin Scorsese had said that the Avengers films and the superhero films just in general, in fact, were not art. And a lot of people got very angry about this, saying, well, there's different versions of art. And they say, and the Avengers is art. And Martin Scorsese said, nope, I disagree entirely. Avengers is not art. Of course, he didn't really seem to explain, well, if it's not art, what is it? Perhaps he would have said something along the lines, well, Avengers is somehow purely entertainment. And I don't think he would be saying necessarily that art cannot be entertaining, right? We just talked about Dali's lobster phone, for example. That is entertaining, and perhaps is art as well. And certainly Martin Scorsese's own movies are quite entertaining, right? They're exciting, they're interesting, they're fun. He's done some kind of funny things in the movies. So the other thing that's kind of interesting about what's happening here is it appears to be, or what Martin Scorsese appears to be saying is, these big budget movies that are intended to appeal to lots of people are somehow not art. And this goes to something that I was thinking perhaps all the way through is art sort of elitist, right? Because it does appear to be an elitist point of view that Scorsese is pushing forward, right? He's essentially saying if you find it easy to watch, it's not art. And as I mentioned with the painting, right, that elite art expert, his opinion about is it art or not clearly outweighs mine, right? And even if I look at whatever the piece of art is forever, and I still say, oh, it's crap, right? It's just a bunch of paint thrown at a wall. My opinion will never be able to wipe away that elitist's idea of what is art and what isn't. So I appear to have grouped myself in the common people's group in the case of art, at least. I am part of the masses rather than the elites. Certainly, I think art could be for everyone, right? I think there are things out there that we all think is art. You go to Rome, you visit the Sistine Chapel. I think everyone who sees that recognizes that is an incredible work of art, and everyone seems to enjoy it. I mean, I'm sure there's some people go there and say, oh, it's crap, I've seen that before. But I think most people, when they see that, are pretty amazed, right? So art can appeal to the masses, but doesn't need to be complicated. Scorsese seems to be going along with that idea, that it needs to be complicated. Because I think we can say that the Avengers movie, even if you think it's crap, which it's not the best movie in the world, is it? It has some sort of message. You can say, oh, it's about friendship and loyalty, or I don't know, what it means to be human, or, you can look at it from another way. It's about overpopulation, something like that, or environmentalism. So it has messages, right? So it's certainly meaning that. And as I said before, it is visually appealing, right? They spend, hundreds of millions of dollars creating those special effects. So it looks amazing, right? And so we compare that to Scorsese's films. They are interesting. They're fun. They have a lower budget. So he doesn't have the big special effects. So in that case, Avengers is beating his movie. But perhaps his story is deeper in some sense, right? Perhaps there's more happening there. It takes more time to maybe understand it. Although, of course, there's many other movies that are much more complicated than his movies. So is he then allowing for the fact that those movies are better or more artistic than his movies? I don't think he is, but that appears to be the logical outcome of what he just told us, right? Another interesting thing that just happened a few days ago, some of you guys might know this artist. His name is Beeple, Beeple, and he is a digital artist, right? He creates art on the computer, essentially. And he has just sold a collage of, I think, something like 5,000 digital images that he put all together. And he sold this for $69 million. And each little pixel you can sort of zoom in on, and it's an image. And these images are mostly something that you might see in almost like a video game or something. They're not the Sistine Chapel in miniature, for example. But a guy paid $69 million for this. And in fact, in a very complicated way, he doesn't even get an original copy of it, since it's digital art. He has this non-fungible token for people who like cryptocurrency type issues. He has an NFT, which means he sort of has the original copy of a thing, but everyone can see this stuff online still, and so it's a little bit odd. But going back to the actual image, is it art? So here, it's certainly interesting, right? It's got lots of pictures, lots of stuff going on. Is it sending a message? None that I could really recognize, but sold for a large amount of money. So perhaps that says there must be some message happening. Or alternatively, this is just simply a hyped up piece of crap, right? And in a few days or weeks, that buyer is really going to regret his purchase. So this perhaps is almost where I want to leave it. I might just add in one other thought, something I have read in the past, which does kind of make sense to me. If you look at sort of the trajectory of art over time, it seems to be sort of morphing into a more simplistic version of itself, right? Like early art often really did seem concerned with beauty in its true sense, right? It was meant to be enjoyed as a visual sort of event, right? You would put it up and you would stare at it or enjoy it. And perhaps there was some sort of religious message or message about nature. And that was what made it art. But over time, it seems to have changed into these simplistic ideas. Certainly we saw that the most in abstract art, where it becomes sort of incomprehensible, right? If you don't have the guidebook open in front of you, you literally cannot tell what is happening. So, like my squiggly lines painting, I am totally lost often when I look at these abstract paintings. And it is often not that enjoyable, perhaps, right? And I only get the pleasure of knowing that I saw a famous painting because someone told me it was famous. And it moves on, and we have the digital art now, which certainly can be quite beautiful. But is it creating something better for us in the way that art seemed to be in the past? Perhaps I'm some sort of classicist, now that I'm thinking on this. The great masters, they were the best ones, and it's been all downhill ever since. The sort of collapse of Western civilization that we can see displayed in the art world, from Da Vinci to Beeple. Yeah. Could be true. It's not great, a lot of the things you see these days, but there's certainly some amazing things out there. So to go back to that question, I think we can take a few pieces of what it takes to be art. There is that emotional reaction. I think that must be there, right? It could be a negative reaction too, right? Or like an unpleasant reaction. But there needs to be some sort of emotional reaction, I think. In addition to that, there probably needs to be some message or story, right? So a movie can probably get away with just the story, but there is a message, perhaps. And there probably needs to be some general agreement or expert agreement on the thing we're looking at is art, right? But I think the masses can determine this as well. If everyone gets together and says to Martin Scorsese, hey, you just keep making gangster movies over and over again, that's not art, right? Perhaps he can't complain, right? So there is this tension between what the people believe is art and what the elite believe is art. And so that does allow, I think, for the individual opinion to sort of perhaps exist in the middle as well, right? Do you think it's art? If you do, great. If you don't, that's okay as well, right? I think though, just as an individual basis, if I go to that art museum and I am looking at a painting and I think it's, like I said, like total crap, right, or incomprehensible, I think as that sort of lay person, the non-expert, I do have to allow for some of that explanation to be given to me, and then make a further determination about, is it art or not. But just like in the movie I mentioned, The Burnt Orange Heresy, this shouldn't overly influence me, right? Remember, in the case of the movie, everything the art expert told the audience was a lie, but it impacted their feelings about the painting anyway. So gaining some knowledge about what you're looking at is certainly helpful to make perhaps a more informed judgment. But I don't think we need to necessarily fully trust all the experts' opinions, right? Trust your own opinion as well. And that is what is art, I guess, right? So another fruitful discussion about big ideas in a small way, I guess. So until next time, have a good day. Bye.